Well, with me in the studio is Natasha Devon. She campaigns on mental health, and she was, for a time, the government's child mental health czar until she was fired in 2016. Natasha, I think, am I right in saying, for criticising government policy as it affected the issue you were supposed to be looking at?
That's right. There was a lot of fanfare in 2015 when I was first appointed. The government said that they were making mental health a priority. But after conducting a lot of research with genuine experts in the field, as well as talking to teachers, parents and healthcare providers, what I realised was that the root cause of poor mental health in young people a lot of the time has to do with austerity in the education system. So I had to start talking about those policies, and ultimately that's why I was fired.
Now, in terms of this case and what it's exposed, and we don't need to go into the detail of the terrible events that led to Amy's death, but the issue here presumably is the number of young people who are getting to this stage of effectively being handed over to a commercial provider. In a sense, that's neither here nor there. It could be a provider within the health service, but basically getting to the point of desperation rather than being treated at an earlier stage. Is that what you're particularly worried about?
It is. I mean, I think it is worth saying at this stage that the fact that the Priory is a private healthcare provider, I think, is relevant here, because whilst we tend to associate it with kind of glamorous celebrities, in fact, 85% of their referrals come from the NHS. That's paid for by the taxpayer, and yet we don't have an accurate record of how many children and young people are dying in those private hospitals. So there's an anomaly there. But yes, you know, mental health issues, like physical health issues, exist on a spectrum, and the longer you leave them, the worse they get. So I wonder why we're doing so much to firefight at the crisis end and not looking at where these mental health issues are beginning.
Because, to be crude about it, it would be a lot cheaper and, as more importantly, a lot more effective to do the intervention early on.
I mean, yes, I wrote to then Education Secretary Michael Gove in 2013, and I said to him that the fact that he had cut the budget for personal health and social education, the arts, sports, drama, all of these subjects which we know are fundamental for self-esteem, confidence and mental health were being cut, would have a catastrophic effect on children's mental health. And here we are all those years later in the midst of a children's mental health crisis. And I feel like that's telling us...
Sorry to interrupt, but how do you define that, a children's mental health crisis? Because that's quite a dramatic statement. I mean, it's based on what? It's
based on, for example, just at the end of last year, Young Minds revealed that the number of young people with a diagnosable mental health issue in an average classroom has jumped from 1 in 10 to 1 in 5. It has doubled. And I feel like if we're seeing a children's mental health crisis, that is telling us something about the culture that we live in. We are failing them systemically. Our education system is no longer fit for purpose, and that's having an impact not only on teachers and parents and children, but on whole communities.
Do we make a mistake then, do you think, when we concentrate a lot, and the media is guilty of this, but actually it's something you will hear a lot of in the kind of common chat and debate, that actually the real problem is social media, the real problem is technology, the real problem is children are becoming isolated for those reasons. It's not really about these other factors.
You know, social media has a dramatic impact on the way that people think, behave and communicate. But the evidence shows that there's only 2 ways that social media can impact your mental health negatively. The first is if you're being cyberbullied, and the second is if it's interfering with your sleep. And we know that sleep is absolutely crucial for mental health. Outside of that, social media is pretty neutral. It's just the platform through which we access the information. And like anything, that can be either positive or negative. But all of this focus on social media, I do think, is stopping us from having some of the conversations that we need to have about why children are being brought to crisis point.
Let me ask you finally, briefly, if you can, about the provision of mental health service beds for young people, because there was a big debate a few years ago about the number of kids who are ending up in police cells because there's nowhere else to put them when they have a crisis moment. Is there anything changing on that?
At present, only £5 per child is being spent on average on child and adolescent mental health services. It's still significantly underfunded, even compared to adult services, which are still underfunded. The average onset age for all the most common mental illnesses, addiction, eating disorders, depression, anxiety, is 14. And yet, children at the age of 14 receive some of the least adequate care, because you're not really a child anymore, you're not yet an adult, and that's why so many campaigners like myself are campaigning for a specific provision for 16 to 25-year-olds to be supported during this really crucial point in their brain development.
Natasha Devon, the former child mental health SAR, thank you very much for joining us on BBC News at 5.